Hello out there, everybody. I was using my reference journal, or what I know many refer to as their idea books, this morning to create this junk journal page, and I thought it would be good to walk through how I use them. And so I have two main reference journals or idea books, this one and this one. This one's super big, so I thought I'd save that for a different flip through. So this one is my flaps and scraps. So I'm going to go ahead and flip through it after I first sort of show how I use it and briefly how it was constructed. So I will move this one out for another time. So here is the Flaps and Scraps book. I've removed the little tie that goes through the grommet there. So this is loose. The signature is actually sewn in, and this is just more decorative on the outside. The cover was made with one of these large pages, and all I did was collage my jelly print scraps that I didn't find to be very successful. Either there was a lot of white space or the paint was just sort of weird. And in this particular one, I first whited it out a little bit with some white acrylic paint using a credit card to scrape over it. Then I did a very thin wash of gold over it as kind of a glaze, and then I splattered some white acrylic paint, and I did varying degrees of watered down, and then I did some gold splatter, and then I've sewn around with both a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. I have used a matte medium, and I've just lined it with some brown paper because, as you'll see as I flip through this, I specifically used what you would consider not nice papers, but this is just a reference book that I'm pretty hard on, so I didn't want to have anything else on the cover besides this flap to help keep it closed. And the reason I like to make them generic has to do with how I use them. I'm really influenced by how things look, and so if I were to do a reference journal or an idea book that had a really specific theme, it sometimes can be hard for me to translate that to a new project. So I used this waterfall as an idea for this page. And so in my book, what I do is just make notes. They're messy. I only care about being able to read it myself. And when I find someone who is the source of the idea, if it's not my own idea, I do note the source in here as well. And then if I come up with anything, so in this case for this waterfall, the original source was noting that you needed to use a space. As I played around, I realized I didn't have to do that, but then I would have some doubled up pages. And so things like that I just keep as a quick note. That way when I decide, oh, I'd like to do a waterfall in a new junk journal, as I did in this little page today, I'll go ahead and flip through it. I actually did two of them. I looked at that and thought, oh, do I want to do the spacing or not? And so in this case, what I wanted to do was include some paper scraps that I thought would be useful in the journal and other places. So I thought to do the waterfall, but instead I just did the scraps separate. So instead of one, whole page, they're just separated like this. And then here again are some more. And then I also did the waterfall here with some, this is paper that I dyed with turmeric. And so you can see I left the space here. And then I just covered it with some washi tape. And then I did it over an envelope instead of on a book page. So I looked at this in order to create this morning. I also thought, oh, I should do a matchbook. And the reason I thought to do this video is I realized, oh, I don't have a matchbook in my idea book. And I think it's just because I do it all the time. But it gave me a reminder to at least write a note in this book. When I was constructing this book, I first only had the pages tied together. I didn't have them bound in. I didn't know how many ideas I wanted to put in a book. I didn't know how bulky it would get. And then after I decided that this was the size that I wanted and this covered the amount of ideas that I wanted, then I went ahead and sewed them in the book. Okay, so in this case I did the matchbook. And then I just did some paper that I've dyed with coffee and watercolor. And then I did the waterfall without using any space in between, except for this one because I wanted to cover up some text. And so even though in my book, you know, I don't have it under a matchbook, or I don't have it under a flap, or I don't have things broken up, just having kind of a generic waterfall with the basic construction is how I use that. Okay, so enough about that. I guess for a sneak peek, this idea here came out of the other idea book. So I'll put that aside and I'll go ahead and walk you all through this book. So let's see. There, I think that looks good. All right, so this was a waterfall idea. This one, I was just playing around with different scraps, and again, I just make notes about that. So that's pretty simple. This one, I've left myself a little note that this is 4 circles and how they're glued together to make this. Then when there's a variation on something, for instance, you know, this is if you do origami, you know, you'll recognize this fold. It's the basis of a lot of origami folds. So I just wanted to show that they're fun to tuck into other envelopes or flaps. And then if I've done a variation, you know, putting a little stamp on it, tying them together, things like that, I'll note it. Then this flap, you know, is similar, except that it's a little petal. I think that's what they were called. So I used a hexagon and then I just cut around little petal shapes. This is just a circle folded in 4s. When it's really obvious to me what I've done, I don't even make a note about it. If there isn't enough room on the page, I've actually used, this is paper that came with some canned goods that we had shipped to us, and so I've left these open, and you'll see in some of the pages coming up that I do tuck other, I guess you'd call them prototypes, into here, or other examples. This one I made a note to myself. I was trying to do something else, a little pop-up thing, and I realized that this was a much easier way to construct a waterfall if you don't want to use a scoreboard and you just want to fold and things like that. So I just made a note about that. Many of my ideas are coming from card makers. I do make cards myself, and I tend to spend my time watching videos about techniques. I'm not really a process video kind of person. If I have time to do that, I tend to want to make the art, not watch other people make the art. It's just me. So a lot of these ideas are card makers, and then if I come up with something that works better in a junk journal instead of my cards, then I'll note that. So here's an example of that. I've noted here the woman whose tutorial I found and followed, and then I noted that her original card just had, you know, these flaps, just 2 of them. And I realized playing around that I could do more like a star, and I've done that in a Christmas journal, and so I've done more, and so I made notes to myself, again, very messy, just enough for me to be able to read to do it. I should mention I do have a card making reference journal. I actually have 2 of them. I can flip through those another time if there's interest. So here's an example of this. I made a note to myself about being careful with the cutter and whether or not to do it with an X-Acto knife or on my paper cutter. So sometimes when there are things like that, that's what I'll tuck in there. This is another card example. And in this case, when there is some sort of mechanism involved, so in this particular case, this card relies on this little mechanism. As simple as it is, you do need it. And so I've just created a little, you know, example with a reminder of just the mechanism. Because sometimes when you look at something completed, it's hard to figure out what you did, especially in my case, if I did it 2 years ago, I forget, you know. So in this case, again, this was a card, and then I've just come up with the idea of actually making it a pocket and a little hidden writing space. So I've made notes about that. And you can do so much with this mechanism. I have several examples of this in my card reference journal. Then this one, here's an example where I've made some notes to myself to be careful about sources, because I like these little, you know, I don't know what I've called them, floating gatefold card. And by the way, I really like Mixed Up Crafts, Sam and Mixed Up Crafts. She's a great card maker, and I follow a lot of her tutorials, and she's in a lot of my card making reference pages. And this was a good example. In here, which I'll show you, is how she did it, and I made a note about that because many tutorials do it like this, where the strips are really visible, and I didn't like that so much. So I did put in the example in the event that I wanted to show the strips. And then in this one, I've just done a little belly band to keep that closed in the pocket. I've also made a note, you know, again, little notes not to make the belly band so tight because they can be hard to take off. So this is just some paper that I dyed. By the way, you can get this look from really bright food coloring. This is food coloring dye. It looks like avocado dye, but it's actually food coloring dye with some coffee. I could show a video about that sometime. But here is Sam's mechanism. So again, I've left the mechanism in place here, so because there's little steps about what you glue and how you align them. And then I have the working piece here. So that's how I've done that. This is a fun one. This is also from Sam's tutorial. Like her, she had mentioned she did this as a child. I did too, but I totally forgot how to do it. And it's actually really simple, but her tutorial is great. So this is a secret message card. And again, same idea. I've shown that I've decided to make it a pocket instead of actually a card. And so the way the secret message card works is I've written letters to remind myself how many spaces there are. So there's all this. You could put pictures. You could leave some as hidden writing spaces. And then this card, actually, the secret message, if you've never seen these, is in there. So neat. So that's why the letters are helpful too, because when you make something and you forget, it can be helpful to have a reference, because if I didn't note that I had A through Z, I might actually forget about this piece because there's so many options with just this one little card. Okay, this one is just a simple stand that if you're a card maker you know, but I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to actually make it a pocket underneath? And so, again, that's just, you know, a small little change that I've made for my junk journals. So again, this pops up here so you can, you know, sort of interact with it in a journal, but then there's a pocket underneath that's hidden. Okay, this one, again, because this has a mechanism, I've just made a note about that. And so this is these expand, so these are really fun when you want to have several photos. And here are the mechanisms. And that's how they work. So that's why I like to have things plain. That way, you know, I don't care about if I need to make this again. It's really easy for me to do that. It's no big deal. These are origami papers, which you'll see in my other book when I flip through them why I used origami paper. This one, I'm going to hold it up because I kind of have to do it two-handed here. So this is a card that you pull it out here, and then this actually opens like this. I didn't quite do the measurements right, and so I have some notes about that. Normally when you do these, this pops open much more easily, but I didn't quite do the measurements, so it doesn't do it well, and it also doesn't fold back in very well, so I won't bother to do it on camera. But in my card making reference journal, I did a better version. Okay, this one, same idea. This is a card that actually pushes instead of pulls, like this. Super fun. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun in a junk journal to actually put it on a little, you know, a little booklet. So, and again, you can also make it a pocket. So I just have a little booklet like that. This one's just an idea that I thought of for a flap in a different way, where, for example, you could have a long pocket with something like a bookmark. You can also have a side pocket like this. So just to, you know, if you, for example, have a nice paper with a picture, the picture stays whole except for small little slits. So it's, you know, a fun little thing to do. This you could put lace down the center or whatever. Here's an example of well, it's funny. This is actually called a twist and pop-up card, and in my card making reference journal, I show how to turn it, you know, do the twist component, but I also discovered that you don't have to twist it, and so I wanted to keep it like that, but I do have another prototype of it twisting to include in the pocket here. But it's really fun. You can see this is the center of the signature, and it wasn't hard to both sew the signature in and to weave this through underneath, because there is just enough of a gap in this mechanism. Let me tilt it, maybe that'd be good so you could see. So neat. So that's a really fun center signature I've used before. Okay, this one is, so now the way this is organized is the first half are the flaps, and now the second half are the scraps. And so here's an example of using scraps, especially white scrap. And for a junk journal, again, I thought, oh, it'd be fun to actually have this serve as a belly band, but you can also have it be a pocket. And in this case, I'm showing with this strip that I thought, oh, it'd be fun to have it be, you know, like a top tuck instead of a pocket. So that's what that is. Same idea with this one. I made a note to myself that, oh, I should have glued this down as a belly band instead of gluing it flat to the thing, but I ran out of space for flaps, but I thought it'd be fun just to kind of do like accordion folds, you know, a simple idea. And then the scrap component, which I'm sure many of you have done, I do it in a lot of journals, is just layering up some scraps on the page edge. So that's what that one's about. I have a lot of reference journals. I also have, speaking of this page edge and also this page, I do have an entire reference journal just for paper piecing, or what I think more people call paper quilting. So this really could belong in my paper piecing reference journal, but what I liked about it, and the reason I put it here, is that I have a lot of white strips from my card making, and I thought this would be a nice way to use them in a junk journal with scraps, and so that's why it's in this book and not the other book. This one I was just playing around with layering paper scraps of different shapes, and then, you know, having them be tucks and pockets and things, so all those move and tuck. Okay, this one is a little paper scrap idea where you put them on a card, but I played around with having them pop up in a junk journal, either as a belly band in the center, that's what this is, and also, you know, you can make them wider so that they can be a belly band twofold, you know, underneath it this way like this, and also through some of the little scraps like this. So just a different idea. And then although these look similar, my note to myself is showing what they look like when they're all the same size versus when the scraps are different sizes. This was my idea of using die cut negatives as a frame. I just did that in a different journal and I didn't want to forget about it, so I went and popped it in this one too. That's what that is. This one I'm sure a lot of you have also done, just the idea of simulating sewing but with paper scraps or strips and then just cutting them. So again, for a junk journal, I just thought it'd be fun if you made it kind of something that opens. And then with the same strips, I saw this on Pinterest, and I do have a note about the source in the pocket. I like the idea of kind of making a flower. And then I know many of you do clusters, as I do, and then, you know, just showing that this is a way you could use a strip, this is a way, and this is a way. I've written a note to myself. I have some rosettes to put in here, and they're just too thick, so I want to make some different ones. But this is also showing, you know, how to use triangles with some doodling and not necessarily just with the paper scrap. But that's why that's blank. So for now, that's living in there. Okay, this one's playing around with, you know, just one shape, but, you know, torn edges, and as a book itself, or as, you know, kind of a cover for a little flip out. And then same idea, actually having these be the pages of a booklet. Playing around with the idea of a paper scrap as a pocket with just a little flower, you know, even a pressed flower would be cute, things like that. This one, I saw an idea on Pinterest about poking the holes and weaving some string as a decorative element, but I thought, oh, it'd be fun to actually make it that you could, you know, tuck something underneath it. So that's what that is. And then just a reminder to myself to use paper scraps as postage stamp, you know, faux stamps. And then again, this is a pocket too. Basic idea of just mixing different paper scraps as a page edge. This one playing around with bunting, which I don't do a lot of, so I wanted to make a note to myself to do some more of that. And then this page is blank, so I still have to think about a paper scrap idea to put in there. I'm bound to find one. So anyway, that is my Flaps and Scraps reference journal. I hope it was helpful to see not only how someone is doing it, but also how they're using them in various projects. Thanks for tuning in, and if you've made it all the way to the end here, thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.